Hello, my name's Simon Mills. I'm a lecturer in early modern history at Newcastle University. My work looks specifically at the histories of biblical and what were called at the time Oriental studies, and at the movement of books and ideas between Western Europe and the Islamic world. By tracing in some detail the circulation of books and manuscripts, I try to understand how people in the past knew what they knew and how their writings influenced the ideas of people who came after them. This is why I'm spending the summer here in Oxford. As part of its Visiting Fellows programme, the Bodleian Library has invited me to explore its historically important collection of Arabic manuscripts. I'm particularly interested in a French scholar who arrived in the city more than 300 years ago, attracted by some of those manuscripts. His name was Jean Gagnier. We don't know very much about Jean Gagnier, not even what he looked like. There are no surviving paintings or statues of him, like this one of the Earl of Pembroke outside the old Bodleian Library. He wasn't eminent enough for that. We do know that he was born in Paris around 1670, raised as a Roman Catholic and ordained as a priest. We also know that he suffered a crisis of faith in his 30s after secretly reading Protestant books, and that he left France to begin a new life as a scholar and a teacher. When Genne arrived here, Oxford was a centre of European intellectual life, but its scholars could still be suspicious of foreigners, especially former Catholic priests. Yet Gagnier, who was an ambitious man, persevered, and by the 1720s he'd established himself as an authority on Arabic. By now the Bodleian Library had acquired a very substantial collection of Arabic books and manuscripts, and the university had invested seriously in the study of the language. The first chair of Arabic was endowed in 1636 and was held by a formidable linguist called Edward Pocock. Pocock's study of Arabic historical texts had opened up a new world to students like Gagnier, and the manuscripts he collected are still an invaluable resource for academics today. Gagnier's most important work was a translation of an Arabic history of the life of the Prophet Muhammad and the early years of Islam. It was printed in 1723 on a wooden press, like this one. Although scarcely read today, Gagnier's book was an important source for other better-known Europeans who wrote about the history of Islam, including Voltaire and the English historian Edward Gibbon. Here's Gibbon in a footnote to his account of Muhammad in the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. "Before I enter on the history of the Prophet, it is incumbent on me to produce my evidence. The best and most authentic of our guides is Monsieur Gagnier, a Frenchman by birth and professor at Oxford of the Oriental tongues." So this is the title page of Gagnier's book. We can see here the author of the original work, a 14th century Muslim statesman called Ismail Abul Fida, and Gagnier's title, The Life and Deeds of Muhammad. Gagnier tells us here that he's taken this source and translated and edited it from one of Pocock's manuscripts in the Bodleian Library, and the famous image here of the Sheldonian Theatre. And what Gagnier's done here is to extract from Abul Fida's much more extensive chronicle and narrative about the early history of Islam. Now, Abul Fida was writing some 700 years after the Prophet's death, so this wasn't an obvious source to use for the origins of Islam. But Europeans before the 19th century knew very little about the sources for Muslim history predating the later medieval period. So here we can see the Arabic text, and next to that Gagnier's Latin translation. Latin still very much the international language of scholarship in the early 18th century. And beneath that, Gagnier's very extensive explanatory notes. So thanks to Gagnier, later authors like Gibbon could read about the early history of Islam in authentic Muslim sources. But Gagnier's translation of the original text has never been studied in any depth, which raises the question of how authentic and how reliable a guide he really was. Some historians have come to think of the time when Gagnier was writing as a period of early enlightenment, characterized by a more open-minded approach to other religions. But even for a serious scholar of Arabic like Gagnier, peeling away the accumulated layers of myth and tradition about Islam was no easy task. Here's one example of that. It's a scene from Muhammad's early life where he returns to his nurse, Halima, and tells of the strange story that he's been thrown to the ground and that two men have torn his stomach. As Abul Fida relates the story, Halima's husband then turns to her and says, "I greatly fear lest the boy has contracted the hypochondriac sickness among his people. Well, what was the hypochondriac sickness? So in this long footnote, Gagnier then connects this to the thought that Muhammad might have suffered from epilepsy. This was a very long-held idea which goes right back to the early Christians who wrote about Islam. It was at root a way of discrediting what Muslims claimed were divine revelations by interpreting them as a series of epileptic fits. So what Gagnier has done here, I think, is to take a very deep-rooted assumption about the Muslim story that Muhammad was an epileptic and then read that back into the Arabic text which he was trying to decipher and to interpret. The key to understanding Gagnier's translation and the narrative about Islam which he passed on to his 18th century readers is to look more closely at his use of manuscripts. So I'm going to meet the curator of the Bodleian's Arabic collections, Alistair Watson. Okay, Alistair, can you tell us what we're looking at here?
This is one of a number of manuscripts held by the Bodleian Library, penned by Jean Gagnier himself in the early 1700s. It's one of a number of his workbooks which contain excerpts from Arabic and also Persian manuscripts alongside Latin translations.
Okay, and I can see here that we're looking at a draft of the Life of Muhammad that Gagnier later publishes. The section that interests me particularly is here where Gagnier's translated the words of Halima's husband, and in the draft he has him say, "I greatly fear that the boy is suffering from that defect which among his people tends to beget pains of the stomach and of the loins." And then he's written here, no doubt, epilepsy. So the question is, what's Gagnier read in the Arabic text? What do you make of his Arabic text here?
The words which come after afflicted or affected lack a preposition which would be needed for that verb. And also the following word appears to be a very rare word indeed, perhaps even concocted, but it does indeed have a root meaning of pain in the belly.
Okay, but that's still quite a jump to get to epilepsy.
It's very far-fetched, and we do know from other sources what the correct reading actually is.
So the question is, what did Gagnier read in Pocock's manuscript?
Unfortunately, we'll probably never know because it has been affected by iron gall ink corrosion, which often affects medieval manuscripts, and that particular passage is completely illegible.
Okay.
But it is worth a look at for other perspectives, including commerce of knowledge and how other scholars have used the book.
Okay, so this is Pocock's manuscript, and this is the actual copy that Gagnier would have read in the Bodleian Library.
Indeed it is. This is volume 1 of Kitab al-Mukhtasar fi Akhbar al-Bashar, so volume 1 of the condensed book of the history of humanity. Mentions the title and author here, and also a number of volumes which are the source texts for this, including Ibn Athir's Kamil.
Okay, and what about the notes that we can see written on the page here?
Yes, this is evidence of previous Arabic-speaking readers. So this is an ex libris of somebody called Mustafa, and then this is a reader's note saying that Abdullah studied this book.
When was this manuscript produced?
This was produced in 1487.
Oh, that's amazing. So
not so long
really
after the original was penned.
Okay, and we're looking here at really early readers of the book.
Yes.
Okay, so if we then turn over a few pages, we can see here the marks of some of the book's 17th and 18th century European readers, perhaps even of Pocock himself. And it seems really amazing to me because you've just shown us the marks, the reading notes of the book's medieval readers, and now we're looking at 17th century readers, and we really have the idea here of a community of scholars in different times and different places, but reading and learning something from this book. And what that makes me think is that I've been telling this story of Gagnier reading this manuscript and then the people influenced by him, Voltaire and Gibbon, but actually there's a much deeper story to it than that because the book goes right back to the medieval Islamic world and its readers in that very different context. Gagnier died without seeing the use of his work made by Gibbon and other writers. By March 1740, he'd been replaced as the Lord Almoner's Professor by Thomas Hunt. He died the same year and was buried here, just a short walk from the Bodleian Library where he spent so many hours of his working life. His story is one of the European discovery of the Islamic past, based, as Gibbon recognised, on the study of authentic Muslim sources. Building on an earlier tradition of scholars like Pocock, and working in a tradition of earlier readers, such as those in the medieval Islamic world. But this was not a straightforward tale of progress. Old prejudices died hard. There was scope for misunderstanding too, as Gagnier read and misread the history of Islam.